It was a quiet, grey start to the morning. Crossing London Bridge, I paused for a moment, looking out along the Thames towards Tower Bridge. The city stretched out ahead of me, already awake and moving, and for a while it felt less like I was beginning something, more like I was stepping away. For centuries people have walked this road, not to arrive somewhere new, but to return to something they had lost, and this time it was my turn. After months without pause, I came here to reset, to realign, to walk with purpose and trust the journey. Through the streets and along the river, with the city slowly waking around me, I simply followed the path. There was no great sense of departure, no clear moment where it all began. Just one step, and then another. The sound of traffic, the movement of people, the weight of the city still close by. But gradually, almost without noticing, something began to shift. Through Victoria Park, the city began to loosen its hold a little. The noise still there, but softer now, carried further away. And as I followed the Hertfordshire Union Canal, the path narrowed, and the world seemed to slow with it. With each step, I could feel myself begin to ease, the weight of the past few months beginning to fall away. The streets gave way to quieter paths, the river to the towpath, and the noise began to fall behind me. By the time I reached the marshes at Tottenham, the rhythm began to change. Just the sound of water, birds overhead, and the steady pace of walking. The further I went, the more the city seemed to loosen its hold. Out across the marshes, with the open ground on either side, there was space again. Space to think, or not to think at all. And somewhere in that quiet, the journey began to settle into something simpler. Not about distance, or reaching a destination, just the act of walking itself. And in that, I realised how much I'd missed it. Simply being out on the path, with the world moving quietly alongside me. By the time I reached Waltham Abbey, the day already felt far behind me. The first miles done, the road stretching ahead, and whatever I carried with me that morning was just a little lighter than before. Day one, and already the journey had begun. The second day began much the same as the first. Grey skies overhead, but something already felt different. The city was gone now, and out along the Lee Valley, following the towpath north, the noise of London had finally fallen away. In its place there was just the sound of water, the occasional runner passing by, and birdsong carrying across the river. It was a different kind of walking, quieter, and a little less guarded. I've always felt on edge in cities, always aware, always watching, but out here that began to ease. I wasn't quite in my stride yet, the rhythm of the pilgrimage hadn't fully settled in, but my head already felt clearer than it had been for a long time. Less cluttered, less noise, just a path ahead and the simple act of following it. For long stretches it was just me and the river, the water moving steadily beside me, as it had done long before I arrived and would long after I'd gone. Now and then the world returned, passing through places like Broxbourne and Stanstead Abbots, before slipping away again as the path carried on. By the time I joined the Hertfordshire Way, there was a quiet reassurance in it, signs to follow, a route laid ahead. Not quite the Camino arrows, but enough to know I was on the right path. The stag markers became a kind of companion, a small thing, but one that mattered more than I expected. By midday, the hunger finally caught up with me, and in Stanstead Abbots I stopped at a canal-side pub, a meal, a pint and a moment to pause. There was no rush. The day had unfolded easily, almost gently, and as I set off again with just a few miles left to Ware, it felt like I'd crossed some kind of threshold. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, just a quiet sense that I was beginning to settle into it. By the time I reached Ware, the second day was already behind me, the road stretching on ahead, and the journey beginning to find its rhythm. By the third day, something had shifted. The rhythm was there now. The walking felt natural, like my body had remembered what to do. I had left the water behind, turning inland along the Hertfordshire Way, out across open countryside. It felt different straight away. Fields stretching out ahead, tracks winding between hedgerows, the path no longer fixed, but unfolding as it went. And for the first time, I felt properly in my stride. The miles came easily, one after another, carrying me forward without much thought. There was a lightness to it now, not just in my body, but in my mind as well. Everything felt simpler. The countryside opened and closed around me, villages appearing and fading, each turn revealing something new. It no longer felt like I was leaving something behind, but moving forward into the journey itself. Not every part of the day was straightforward. Near Much Haddon, the road disappeared beneath water. No clear way through, just a moment to stop, look, and find another way across. Step by step, working it out as I went. And then, back into the rhythm again. By the time I reached Stanstead Mountfitchet, the distance had passed quickly, the third day behind me, and the pilgrimage now fully underway. By the fourth day, the walking had settled into something steady. The rhythm was there now, each step coming a little easier than the last, and there was less thinking involved, less effort in it all. I was simply moving forward, following the path as it unfolded ahead of me. The countryside stretched out quietly, fields, hedgerows and small villages passing by without much resistance, and somewhere in that, the road began to feel more natural beneath my feet. There was a kind of ease to it now, a quiet acceptance of the rhythm the day had taken on. By the time I reached Saffron, Walden, it had been another full day on the road, and like the days before, it ended the same way, finding somewhere to sit, something to eat, and letting everything settle. It wasn't until I was in the pub that I realised something was missing. At first, just a feeling that something wasn't quite right. Then it hit me, my drone, gone. I traced the day back in my mind, the fields, the paths, the places I'd stopped along the way. And then the church. I left my bag for a moment, thinking it was there. It wasn't. The funny thing was, the woman sitting next to me seemed more concerned than I was, as though I should have been reacting, doing something about it, but I just sat there. Maybe it was just my time spent on pilgrimages, learning not to hold on to things too tightly. But out there, on the road, it felt different, like something had simply happened and was now part of the journey. Something left behind, and by the end of the evening I had already begun to let it go. By the fifth day, the grey had started to give way to something brighter. The path led out across open countryside, fields stretching wide in every direction, the horizon never far away. There was a sense of space to it, nothing closing in, just the road ahead and the sky above. And with that, a quiet feeling of freedom in the walking, the kind that only comes when there's nothing to do but keep moving forward. And then, of course, there was the drone, or rather, the lack of it. At this point, you'll just have to imagine some sweeping aerial shots of all of this, because I certainly was. In a way, it didn't feel like anything was missing. The road was still there, the walking unchanged, just a different way of seeing it. I found myself stopping in Ashton, where I was welcomed in for a tea with the parishioners at the church. A simple moment, but one that stayed with me. Sitting, talking, sharing stories, before stepping back out onto the road again. These brief encounters seem to carry as much meaning as the miles themselves. I passed over old ground that had been walked long before me, the Roman burial mounds rising gently from the land, a reminder that this wasn't a new path, just one I was walking in my own time. Moments like that seem to appear without warning, small reminders of how long these landscapes have been lived in. And as I carried on, I found myself settling back into it again, out across the open fields with the sun at my back and the sound of bird song carrying through the hedgerows. There was a steadiness to it, the kind that comes when you stop thinking too much and just let the day unfold around you. The land stretching out quietly on either side, the path rising and falling beneath my feet, and nothing to do but keep moving forward. Moments like that seem to pass without effort, simple and unremarkable, and yet exactly what I'd come for. Step by step, the fields gave way to the edges of town, and by the time I reached the stage end, another day had quietly passed, the journey continuing on, steady as ever. Day 6 began more heavily than the ones before it, a restless night behind me, the creak of floorboards and passing footsteps never quite allowing sleep to settle, and ahead a longer day than most. With no accommodation along the route, 2 stages would have to become one. 37 kilometres lay ahead. There was no real choice in it, just a quiet understanding that the road would ask a little more today. The walking began steadily enough, but the tiredness sat just beneath the surface, never quite leaving, just carried along with each step. The landscape felt different too. The churches along the way, older still, but marked by something that had come after them. The traces of Oliver Cromwell and the years of Puritan reform, where decoration had been stripped back and much of what once filled these spaces had been taken away. They stood quieter now, simpler, carrying a different kind of history. And walking through them, there was a sense of time layered over itself, of what had been and what had remained. The miles stretched on. Fields, roads, villages, one giving way to the next, without much pause in between. It became less about how far was left, and more about just continuing, holding a steady pace and trusting it would carry me through. By the time I reached Bury St Edmunds, the day had taken its toll, but there was something waiting there, a familiar face, Neil, someone I had known from my time living in Norfolk, a small connection back to another chapter of life, meeting me at the end of a long day on the road, and with him a replacement for what had been lost, a new drone. At the end of the longest day so far, there was quite sense of balance in it. The road had taken something, given something back, and reunited me with an old friend. The seventh day began a little differently. After the long miles of the day before, there was a sense of energy returning, a lightness back in my step, and with it, a small sense of completeness again. A new drone in my bag, even if I hadn't quite had the chance to set it up yet. It felt like something had been restored. The path followed the St Edmunds Way, running alongside the River Lark, a route that felt strangely familiar. I'd walked this stretch before in reverse, on a one-day pilgrimage the year before, and now returning to it again, it felt different, slower, more deliberate, as though I was seeing it properly this time. After Culford, the world seemed to empty out. No more stops, no distractions, just a path ahead, leading deeper into Thetford forest. The track stretched on through the trees, fields opening and closing around them, the land shifting quietly beneath my feet, and then the wind. It had been there all day, but out in the open, it found its strength. Gusts sweeping across the land, lifting the dust from the dry ground, until at times it felt almost unreal, like something closer to the desert than the English countryside. Clouds of dust rising and moving across the fields, the path ahead fading in and out as the wind carried it onward. And through it all, herds of deer stood grazing, watching quietly as I passed, as though I was the one out of place. There was something wild in it, unexpected, unpredictable, and yet it felt completely part of the journey. The miles passed steadily once more, and by the time I reached Thetford, the day had taken on a character all of its own. Another stretch of the road behind me, the journey continuing on, carrying me further north. I spent the morning catching up on my notes, taking the time to write, to reflect, and to make sense of the days behind me. There was no rush, only a short distance ahead, and the day stretching out with more space than usual. By the time I set out, it was later than it had been all week, and the walking followed the same pace, unhurried, easy. Muntjac deer moved quietly through the undergrowth, easy to miss at first until they revealed themselves in the stillness. Small moments, but ones that seemed to linger a little longer. Following the river out of Thetford and back into the forest once more, it felt like a softer day, the kind that doesn't ask much of you, just to walk and be there. The path carried on through the forest, winding between the trees, the light shifting as it filtered through the canopy above. It felt enclosed in a different way, not confined but held within. the sounds of the outside world fading, replaced by the quiet movement of the woods around me. I took the chance to test the drone again, letting it follow behind me along the path, moving through the trees the same way I was. I was just immersed in it all, enjoying myself. At one point I crossed beneath the railway, the line cutting through the forest above, before the path slipped back into the trees once more. The wind was still there, moving through the trees, but now the sun had broken through, bringing warmth that hadn't been there before. The path followed the river closely, and as the day unfolded I found myself drawn to the water once again, the little ooze moving gently beside me, sunlight catching the surface, shifting and flickering as I walked alongside it. Birdsong carried through the trees, constant and unbroken, until it felt like part of the path itself. By the time I reached Brandon, the day had passed gently, an easier stretch of the journey, but one that stayed with me all the same. The ninth day began in the open once again, cattle grazing quietly as I passed by, fields stretching out underneath the clear skies. The sun was already there, and with it, a sense of ease in the walking. My stride felt strong and steady, carrying me forward without much effort. Before long, the path led back into the forest. Soft ground beneath my feet, the trees closing in once more. It felt familiar now, moving between these spaces, open land giving way to woodland, and back again. Further along, the route passed by pig farms, their smell carrying long before they came into view, a different kind of presence in the landscape. And then, back into the forest once more. The path winding deeper through Thetford, quiet and steady beneath the trees. Around halfway through the day, I came across the Desert Rats Memorial, a reminder of the training grounds that once occupied this land, and the history carried quietly beneath the surface. It stood in contrast to the stillness around it, another layer of the landscape marked by time in a different way. From there, the day began to change. The path gave way to roads, and before long I found myself walking alongside the A road, which was a different kind of walking again, harder underfoot and less forgiving. Each step felt a little more, and gradually the strain began to show, a sharpness building in my right shin, not enough to stop me but enough to notice, the kind of discomfort that settles in and stays with you. The final miles stretched out longer than they should have, the road carrying on, step after step, until at last I reached Great Cressingham, the day ending on a different note, a reminder that not every stretch of the journey comes easily. With 3 days left to walk, there was a quiet awareness now that the journey was beginning to draw to a close. Not quite the end, but close enough to feel it. That familiar sense of being at the beginning of the end. The road carried on ahead of me, long stretches of tarmac, fields opening out on either side. The kind of walking that gives you time to think, whether you want it or not. By now, the distance was no longer the challenge. It was how my body carried it, and somewhere around halfway through the day, I began to feel it more clearly. A sharpness in my shin, building with each step. Subtle at first, but impossible to ignore. The pace slowed. Strides became shorter. Pauses more frequent. Each mile taking a little more effort than the last. And with that, a quiet doubt began to creep in. Whether the final days would feel the same, or whether they would become something to endure. The path joined the Pedder's Way, stretching out ahead in long, straight lines. An older road beneath my feet, walked for centuries before me, and along it, a small marker, a reminder of something older still, a sign that wasn't just a path, but a line carried through time. Moments like that seemed to ground the day, even as the walking became harder. I followed the trail, cutting cleanly through the landscape, the same line stretching on, mile after mile. There was simplicity to it, and that is what I needed, with each step a little more deliberate now, the body beginning to resist what the mind was asking of it. The rhythm still there, but no longer effortless, just something to hold on to as the miles continued, and ahead, in the distance, I could see South Acre. I had a thought about passing it by, the leg in agony and the road still ahead, but something in me wouldn't allow it. This was a pilgrimage, and some places you don't just walk past, so I turned off the path and made my way towards the church. Step by step the miles continued, not as easy as before, but still moving forward, and by the time I reached Castle Acre, the weight of the day had settled in. Thankful I reached my accommodation, where I soaked my legs in the bath. This was the penultimate day. The journey was beginning to draw to a close, and with it the familiar bittersweet feeling. The destination getting closer, while the road itself was slowly running out. I carried both with me as I walked on. There was a quiet awareness now that each step was one of the last. Moments that only days ago felt routine had begun to take on a little more meaning. My leg, now taped up like a Picasso painting, had eased the worst of the pain. Not gone, but manageable. I adjusted my stride, careful with each step, feeling the ground a little more than before. There was no rush now, just a steady movement forward, working with it rather than against it. And slowly I made my way towards Litcham. As the miles passed, the landscape began to feel familiar. Roads I had once cycled along, without a second thought, now walked step by step, at a very different pace. Villages where I once stopped for a pint, names I hadn't thought about in years, now appearing again, one after another. And with them came memories, fragments of a different time, a different rhythm of life. It felt strange, walking through places that had once been so familiar, and seeing them in a completely different way, slower, quieter. as though the road had given me the space to notice them properly this time. And somewhere in that, the journey seemed to fold in on itself a little, past and present, walking side by side. The road ahead growing shorter, while everything behind me seemed to stretch further and further back. By now, it wasn't about the distance anymore, not about reaching the end, just being out there, for as long as the road would allow it. Holding on to it without trying to, step by step, the miles carried me forward, through quiet lanes, open fields and places I thought I knew, until gradually, the day began to draw in, and I found myself arriving in Fakenham. Another day behind me, just one more to go, and the road not quite ready to let me go just yet. The last 10 kilometres remained. The sun stood high and a gentle wind followed at my back, as it had done for so many who had walked this road before me. I slowed my pace, not out of weariness, but to hold on to these final moments a little longer. Along quiet lanes, with birdsong in the hedgerows, the world felt unchanged, as though it had always been this way. And yet, even so, the distance fell behind me. Fields passed beneath my feet, the crops bending softly in the wind as I made my way down into North Barsham. There I paused at the final church before Walsingham and left a simple note in the visitor's book, almost there. And then before I quite realised it, the Holy Mile lay ahead. From the rising ground I slowed once more and let my thoughts drift back over the days behind me. The long miles, the quiet moments, the doubts, the joys, each step carrying me here. For a while I walked with it all, and somewhere along that road, without quite noticing when it happened, I found a kind of stillness.